Dr. Mudassir Hassan Bhatt, ARD, Regional Center, Srinagar. RD Shimla has also joined us. Different section heads at Regional Center, Srinagar. Assalamu alaikum and a very warm good morning to all of you. It is indeed a matter of great pleasure for me to welcome my friend as an expert for the session that we are going to have on a very important subject of principles of waste management today, which will be delivered by an expert who has very vast experience in the university on field, and he has done some great work, research work in his own area. So it's indeed a great pleasure for me to have him with us for the session today. As we all know, when we talk about waste management or waste disposal, which basically includes various processes and actions which are required to manage waste from its inception to its final disposal. Basically, this includes collection, transport, treatment, and disposal of waste, together with the monitoring as well as the regulation of this waste management process and waste-related laws, technologies, and economic mechanism. So we know waste can be solid, liquid, or gases, and each type has a different method of disposal and management. And I'm not the expert in the area to discuss how that management should be there. So when we talk about 3 Rs, it can simply mean reduce, reuse, and recycle for us, but it is much more than that. Keeping in view the various challenges that we are seeing, that we are confronted on day-to-day basis from the side of the environment. So I hope my friend from the University of Kashmir will be in a better position to explain all the mechanism that is involved in the waste management, as well as the real meaning of these 3 Rs that we are going to have a proper understanding after this session from our worthy expert. So without much taking time, any more time, so I would like to request my friend, Dr. Samiullah, to enlighten us regarding the principles of the waste management and 3 Rs in this session. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, thanks to the organizers, especially Dr. Shahnawaz, who is Regional Director, IGNOU Srinagar. My friend Mr. Shaukat is also already there, and rest of the colleagues from the IGNOU. It is a pleasure to have actually Mr. Shaukat here after a long time, because we used to be actually the colleagues in the same school and the same higher secondary. So it is a good, I could actually see the face of a Shaukat at least here. Regarding this lecturing so far, this topic is concerned, let me just give you a first. I guess it is actually on the screen right now. Is it this? Yes, okay. Regarding when we had talked the lecture, so far I was given an understanding that I need to talk actually on the principles of waste reduction so far the 3 Rs are concerned. So for the waste itself, it's a big world. So once preparing and I came to know what is the target audience for which I have to actually deliver a lecture, then I came to know what is the target audience, and I tried to actually reduce my presentation with my own research rather than an academic presentation for the benefit of the students. So in that context, I have actually tried to actually convey the message vis-a-vis the 3 big areas. That's what is the waste concept. First part will be a couple of 10 minutes will be what is the concept of waste. Second will be the nature of the problem. When we use the word nature of the problem, means status of the problem, to what extent it is a challenging one. So I'll be actually, and regarding the concept of a waste stream, there are a number of wastes which I may not be in a position to actually delve in so far one lecture is concerned. Here in this lecture, I have tried to actually give a small picture on the municipal solid waste. So for the Indian scenario is concerned. Second part, so for the sewage as a waste is concerned. So a couple of more minutes, I will be actually giving some information on the wastes. So for the wastewater is concerned. Then another part of the presentation that will actually cover, that is the title, the principles of a waste management, where 3 hours came into the picture. So at the end of the lecture, I'll be in a position to, I have actually noted certain points from my own academic and research experience. What are the issues, what are the challenges, and what are the solutions? So this is the background of the presentation that we'll be having for 1 hour. In that context, let's actually start. What is the first one? What is the waste? If you look from the definition point of a technical point of view, so for the waste is concerned, everybody may think of any item, or what we call as, which we are not in a position to use it again, or it doesn't become a serve or purpose, that becomes a waste. Now, if you're looking from the technical point of a waste, for example, the carbon dioxide and the oxygen. For me, the carbon dioxide is the byproduct. It is a waste because I have to actually give up the carbon dioxide. But same is the food for what we call as the plants, because they cannot take the photosynthesis. So their byproduct is the oxygen actually. So it depends upon the context. Actually, we are talking about what is the waste. Means what is a waste to me does not necessarily, it can be a waste to the other person. A. Second, what means to be a waste today does not mean it was a waste yesterday and it can be a waste tomorrow. So there means that there is a context actually behind what we understand by the concept of waste. Now let me talk about what is this context. Let us talk of the time and the space dimension of a waste. A couple of decades back, there were certain things which were not in a position to use, they become a waste. But right now we are in a position to use what used to be the waste yesterday. Yesterday, I'm giving a simple example that we are right now talking of a vermicomposting. For example, 10 decades back, we were not actually acquainted with this type of terminology. So what used to be the yesterday a waste can be a resource now. This is one part so far the time is concerned. Or looking bigger from the time point of view, so far the temporal dimension is concerned. That was what used to be 100 years back, but can be the future of 100 years, because the science and technology can give the answers to certain questions. Second part of this dimension context of a waste is space dimension. What is the waste for the Africans and the Asians does not necessarily mean it will be the waste for the Europeans and the Americans, because they have an access to the science and the technology where they are in a position to convert this waste as a resource. So in that context, or in simple terms, Kohinoor or gold with me when I am actually in the desert, it will be considered as a waste, because I need a water that is a resource for me. So it is actually the context we are talking. If we are in a desert, the Kohinoor and the gold will not serve my purposes. It will serve my purposes if I am in Delhi, or I am actually in the Shimla or in the Srinagar. So this is a context based when we need to understand the concept of what we call as. Having said about the technical aspect or the context of this waste, now there has been the paradigm shift from waste to the resource. As I was talking about that, what used to be the organic matter right now, we are now trying to actually shift from this waste stream into right now resource. Maybe we are in a position to actually convert the organic matter into the composite that can be used with the organic fertilizers, so on. Or for example, we have the macrophytes here right now, which used to be a waste here. Right now, we are in a position to convert that macrophytes in the lakes and wetlands, that they have an opportunity that it can be converted into the rich manure that is replacing the inorganic fertilizers. So this concept has actually changed from what we call as waste management to the material management. In context of a waste management, it means first, we are actually creating a waste. Then we are thinking of the solution. The shift is right now, paradigm shift is that we first think of, let us not create a waste, or let us reduce the what we call amount of waste that we are actually generating. So in that context, there is a shift from that, and it needs efforts from all directions, whether we talk of a science, whether we talk of a teachers, whether we talk of a students, whether we talk of a society as well. It needs that we capture this type of a paradigm shift if we have to actually take what we call as give an offer and a solution to this type of a challenge that is waste management. Having said about the context of the waste definition, all of this, for example, you and me are very concerned about waste, because from left and the right we are thinking the municipal solid waste. Certain people think of that it is the e-waste, electronic waste. Certain may think of it as a radioactive waste. Certain may think in the other direction that it is a plastic waste. But by and large, we are talking about that we all are concerned. We have not seen this type of a waste being generated prior to this, because our lifestyle has changed. And all of this actually stems from that. Somehow we are directly or indirectly connected with the concept of a sustainable. Means we are asking these questions to ourselves. To what extent we can actually afford to generate this much amount of waste, and what are the actually chances of we can take care of this type of what we call as waste. So for the management is concerned, recycling is concerned, disposal is concerned, treatment, because at the end of a day it actually needs a amount means that we have to pay. It actually tells upon our budget and the pocket. So three pillars of a sustainability are that you have the actually strike a balance between these three components. One is environment, second is economic, and third one is a social one. Among us these, they are actually what we call as overreaching each other. The one, what could be the desirable, second could what would be the viable, third is equitable. When we use the what we call as a viable, it means there can be the science and the technical interventions, but our economic positions will not allow us to use it. Means the cost is very high to that type of a technology, that type of a technique, that type of a, what we call application. Or for that matter, it may be only the Europeans, the Americans, but not the Asians, the Africans, where the 60% or more than 60% of the population live, which can have access to the equity. That's what we call as, this should be the equitable access to the science and technology. And desirable means that what we are doing, it should not impact the what we call as the environment. If you have these three types of actually, and then it takes care of social, economic, and the environment, it becomes what we call a part of a sustainability, that we are actually directly or indirectly connected here when we actually display and show our cause of concern vis-a-vis the waste management. If you look at this, I talk about that there is a concept of a waste stream. You have a different types of wastes, and I initially talked about I may not be in a position to actually talk of all these wastes, but I will focus on two types of wastes. That will be actually the municipal solid wastes, and that will be actually the sewages. If you look at this picture, you have a different types of wastes. Food scraps forms a 13%. Then you have the paper, glass, plastic, and all of this. If you talk of what we call as from the management of point of view, you have a 13% that goes to the combustion. Landfill goes to the 54%. Recovery only goes 24%, and the composing the 9%. Now, having these two, what we call as a pie charts, if you look clearly, it speaks that what is the quantum of a generation of what we call as a waste. Is the second slide that will be talking of a quantum of a generation. That this is a cause of concern. If we are generating this type of a municipal solid waste, how much of a land is required, how much of a, what we call as a money is required, and what is the situation today, and after 2030 or 2050, how much of a generation of a waste will be there. Now, if you look at the Indian context, it is actually this problem of the waste is throughout the world, and India is no more exception to this. However, there can be a difference in so the science and technology availability is concerned. Now, if I will like to have your attention actually on this topic, that is the solid waste statistics. So, for the Indian context is concerned, you have 62 million tons right now, and among us this, it is by 2031 it will increase to 165 million tons and 436 million tons by 2050. Now, looking at this figure, how much of a generation in 2050 and 2030, we need to think of how much of a land we can afford to actually dig so for the disposal wastes are concerned. Or for that matter, if you look at the what is your contribution actually as a person, as an individual, that you are generating a 200 grams to see 600 grams per person per day. Means daily you are actually 600 and half a kg. Means 15 kg is contributed by each of us. And if you look at the Indian population of 1.3 billion, where it goes to. So it is what we call sending an alarming, what we call a situation to the policymakers, to the scientists, that we cannot actually leave it as such. So far, the quantum of a generation of a waste is concerned, where 43 million is actually collected, 11 million is treated only, then you have a 30 million is dumped in the landfill site. And among us, this so far the solid waste is concerned, you have 80% of the municipal waste that gets collected, but 20 to 30% waste is processed only and treated. Means rest 70% is there already, which is not treated. When it actually enters into the atmosphere, it is creating a lot of problem. So far, this waste problem is concerned, or what we call as the recipient systems are concerned. Now, if cities in the Indian context, they continue to dump the waste at the present rate without treatment, it will need 1240 hectares of land per year, and with projected generation of 160 million tons of waste by 2031. Means the requirement of setting up a landfill for 20 years of 10 meters height will require 66,000 hectares of land. Where this land will come? The land is a very costly affair, especially in the urban and metropolitan cities. You actually understand what is the cost of a land. So there can be what we call as the resource recovery, that some generation of what we call megawatts. It has a capacity of that 439 megawatts of energy can be actually. Then it can have what we call as the, so for the manure is concerned, that can also come from this 1.3 million cubic meters of a biogas per day can be. But it depends upon whether we have the access to the technology, whether the governance and the governance structures are so favorable that it leads to at a massive level that this amount of waste can be actually converted into the energy. Now, having said about this municipal solid, I'll be taking a couple of minutes actually on the sewage. I think when we use the word sewage, it means what we call as a wastewater. What is the amount of water that we are using? For example, if we use 100 liters or the 100 liters per person per day, 80 is coming actually in the, again, that's called a wastewater stream. So where this comes waste, it can be the gray water or the black water coming from the bathroom, laundry, kitchen, urine. But when you look at the wastewater that is coming actually, where at the end of a day it goes, those people who actually look who are from the Kashmir, they will think about that. We don't have a sewage treatment plants. Whatever the sewage we generate, it is actually coming into our streams, lakes, ponds, wetlands, except actually the Srinagar city, where we do have a sewage treatment plants. I will actually talk about what is the capacity and what is the gap between the generation and the capacity after this. But let's talk of what is the global wastewater generation. Means how much of a wastewater is actually generated. It is 380 billion cubic meter of water that is generated throughout the world, which is fivefold the amount of released by the Niagara Falls annually. Or if you look at the wastewater production globally, it is expected to increase by 24% by 2030 and 51% by 2050 over the current level. Means if it is a 380 billion at this point of it can go up to the 1000 billion. And are we in a position to actually offer such a capacity that can actually treat this much of what we call as energy? So in that context, worldwide, 80% of this water is actually generated that is discharged without any proper treatment. Now look, if worldwide there can be a difference in the developed world and the developing world, where the Europeans and Americans can have what we call as 60% treated water, and the Asian and the Africans, they have a 60% what we call as the water, or 80% of our water, but only 20% treated water. Now, if you look at this, where this wastewater goes, it goes into the streams, it goes into the lakes, wetlands, which is a drinking source for all of us. As a result of this, it has a cost. Now, when I use the word what we call it has a cost, if you look at the water resources that we do have available from the world point of view, if you look at the Asia, you have 60% of population, but only 36% of water. But if you look at the rest of this, for example, Africa, this gap is not much, means 11% of water, 13% this. And if you look at the Europe, 8% of water and 13% means double the gap. They do have issues, but they have a science, they have a technology, which are so for the access is concerned. But if you look at the North and Central America and the South America, 15% water and 8% only population, 26% water in South America, 6% water. They have a much more water than the population. As a result of this, is a much more cause in the Asia than actually what we call in the rest of the world. Now, what is the composition actually? Why we are concerned about this waste sewage? it is 99% water. But still, if it is 0% suspended salt with the impurities, it is a cause of concern because it is fully loaded with the microbial biota. That is every tendency that it can actually compromise the public health. When I use the word, it can actually compromise the public health. A large number of diseases that I'll be showing what we call as a data on that, they are responsible for actually this because of this sewage that is entering into our systems without the treatment. So this management of a sewage is the biggest challenge right now because it is hitting the target of a sustainable development goal number 6, which we are aspiring actually that every person on this planet must ensure, we should ensure access to the safe water resources and the sanitation for all. But unfortunately, it is not like that. 2.4 billion people lack access to the basic sanitation services. Thousands of children die every day from the diarrheal disease linked to the poor hygiene. Access to the water, sanitation, and hygiene is a human right, yet 1.8 billion use fecally contaminated drinking water. That is the cause of concern that if we have the fecally contaminated water because of this waste treatment, that we are not in a position to actually treat it because we don't have a money to play, actually give an infrastructure that will take care, or our science and tech, we don't have access to that science and technology that will take care. All of these factors lead to that this is the grave solution and it needs to be taken care of. Now, if you look at the sewage generation in what we call an Indian context, in the class first cities, you have a 50% on what we call as this sewage that is actually what we call as a generation, and treatment capacity is only 51%. But if you look at what we call as a class metropolitan cities, but if you look at what we call as class first cities, sewage and generation is and treatment capacity is only 32%. Having said this, it means what is the fate of our metropolitan cities in the India and the class first and the class second towns, and class second towns you have only 8% capacity. It means whole of this data statistics, it speaks of that the amount of waste water that is generated and the capacity that we do, there is a large difference. As long as this large difference and the gap remains there, our public health will be compromised. Now look at this percent-wise distribution of installed capacity of STPs. You have a Tamil Nadu that is having a 16.9%, Andhra Pradesh 15%, you have a Punjab 14%. Then rest of this, we do have what we call as little amount percentage of that, only a Delhi what we call as. So for metropolitan city is concerned, okay, it has a much more that is actually treated, it goes into the Jamna. That's why it is becoming what we call as both river Ganga and the Jamna, they are hit because we are not in a position to actually take care of the wastewater that is entering into the system. So these sources they have talked about that the global wastewater generation is that 308 billion. Then global 40% is what we by 2030 and 51%. We have already talked about this one. Now the high income countries on average treat. I have given an Indian context on this. They actually treat 70% of water generated by them. But upper income countries, they provide treatment to 38% of the wastewater generated by them. Low middle income countries provide treatment 28%. And the low income countries treat only 8% of the wastewater. Now, having said about this data stacks, if you look at this, you can think of to what extent we are vulnerable actually. Third world countries or the Asian countries are vulnerable because of the tendency that our public health can be compromised because of the diseases that will be actually transmitted because of sanitation, what we call as a services. Look at the data when we talk about Venezuela. 97% of the sewage generated directly into the environment without providing any kind of a treatment. It means 3% treatment, and that's not. Like Turkey discharges 75% of the wastewater generated. 71% of the wastewater generated in the European countries. Then we have in Latin America 2%, 20% of the wastewater. Middle East and the North Africa, we have the 51%, while as in the Asian countries, we only treat 32% of waste that is actually generated. Now, having said about this, look at the Indian context. Total sewage generation of the country is nearly 61,000 MLD, out of which only 22,000, leaving a gap of 38,000. So where this 88,000 goes, it will go enter into a receiving waters, which we are actually using for our own different types of services. Now, the Central Pollution Control Board has reported that out of 53 MLD of sewage generated, 19 is treated in metropolitan cities. However, it also stated in 2017 that 13% of the sewage is effectively treated out of 18.6% of total treatment capacity. So among all metropolitan cities in the India, Delhi has the highest capacity of sewage treatment, that's 29%, followed by the Mumbai, and the rest of the cities and the what we call as class first cities and class second cities and the towns, there is not much of what we call as, if you look at this class first cities, total sewage generation 498 cities is estimated to be 35,000 MLD, out of which only 11,000 MLD is treated, which is 32% of the generation. Class second towns, the total sewage generation is 225 in 206.96 MLD, out of which treatment capacity exists for only 233.7 MLD, which is 8% of the sewage generation. Now, this is the status of affairs vis-a-vis the one waste that I am actually trying to make a point in. This is the wastewater. You can see what is the what we call as the status of the problem, or what we call as what is the context of this problem. Now, those people who have what we call as live in the Kashmir or the Srinagar, you see what we call as regarding this. We have only 5 or 6 treatment within the city, although there are a couple of coming are actually in Anantnag city as well. Look at the total sewage generation of the Srinagar is 170 MLD. But the installed treatment capacity that can treat this whole wastewater, it is only 54.2 MLD. And the gap that is remaining or that goes into the recipient water system is 106 MLD is disposed. So in that context, you have a large amount of water even in the Srinagar city, that is a capital city, that you have a large gap. In that context, that's why our aquatic systems, be it river, lake, wetland, spring, is showing the signs of what we call as eutrophication, because all of the waste is actually entering into this. You can have a look at this, how many sewage treatment plants in 2005 they have been given actually on the periphery of a Dal Lake. So whatever the waste is generated right now in the Srinagar city, it is actually treated by these sewage treatment plants, but they are not still sufficient, because half of this again goes into the rest of the wetlands and the lakes, which is a cause of concern. Having said about the municipal solid waste, then the sewage, now what is the major impacts that it can have on the eutrophication, public health, and aquatic ecosystems? One is this wastewater without treatment, it actually enters into the receiving waters. It is having what we call as the growth of these plants, or what we call a macrophytes. If you look at the Dal Lake, or what we call as the Ancha, you have the huge infestation of these macrophytes. It is only because when the wastewater enters in, 100 years back, it was not the case. We have the clear crystal waters of the Nigin Lake. People from the America and the rest of the Europe will come, and those people, they will have what we call swimming in the Nigin Lake. It used to be 100 years back, but the situation right is now that people do not like to have a look where we do have macrophytes, and the cause of concern is again because the waste is actually, the sewage is actually coming into the lake system, which is giving the nutrients like nitrogen, the phosphorus, and you have a problems like the anoxia. When there is no oxygen means fish kills will take place. Recent incidents in the Jhelum at Chhatabal, large fish kill takes place. A couple of years back, there was a fish kill episode in the Nigin Lake, again because of the anoxia, there was no, and there is again, if you have a large amount of nutrients, it leads to the algal blooms. One is these algal blooms actually decay, they actually exhaust all of oxygen, leading to the hypoxia, thereby events of fish kills. So they will even go for the damage to the water treatment. Change in the community composition means what used to be the composition. For example, we used to have an indigenous fish like Schizothoricus here, what we call as a Kashmiri kosher gourd. But it is being replaced by the carp, that is what we call as the exotic fishes, because the conditions congenial that were before that, they have changed. So it has destabilized the ecosystem. As a result of this, there is a change in the community shift there is a change in the physical and the chemical properties as well. Apart from the aquatics, we have the health impacts, as I was talking about, like cholera, typhoid, dysentery, schistosomiasis, hepatitis, and other intestinal nematode infections. It is because of this waste when it enters into this waste stream without treatment. And globally, more than 2.2 million people die every year. Means 22 lakh die every year due to the waterborne disease, out of which 1.4 million deaths they are reported in case of children, especially the children below the 5 years. They are vulnerable, and it is a big toll because of this the sewage. So you can understand what are the implications of these what we call sewages if we are not in a position to manage the sewage. These are the what we call as the pathogens that are carried by the sewage. You have the typhoid like Salmonella typhi, then you have the cholera, you have the diarrhea, you have the there's dysentery, giardiasis. All of these are carried because of the sewage, which is not treated. There is no chlorination, there is no disinfection. As a result of this, it is telling actually on our health. So these are the deaths per year because of this water-related mortality. Millions of deaths, especially the diarrheal disease. Now, the another part that is the part of the presentation that I'll be focusing on is actually the concept of a 3 Rs. Before this, I have actually tried to actually this present a context of a waste status of the problem. Then I took two what we wastes. One was the municipal solid waste. Second was the sewage as a case study that how impact it is having. Then what is the solution for that? I will be actually for half an hour. I will be actually spending on time on what are these 3 Rs. That is what we call as the framework for the responsible waste management. So you have actually heard these 3 Rs. One is the reduce, second is the reuse, and third is the recycle. Although there is a fourth R, there is a fifth R, also what we call as coming. We will be also talking about that. Let us go one by one. When we use the word what we call as managing or what we call manage principles of management, we have to take care of that. There is a hierarchy called what we call as waste management hierarchy, wherein we need to think of the priority needs to be given. First is the source reduction. Second is to be followed by it is to be reuse. Third is the recycle, and fourth is the disposal. So later has to be we need to have a what we call as what is coming from the waste. It has to be actually stopped or reduced rather than at the source point. I will just try to give one example. We have a concept of a prevention term and we have a concept of a control term so far the pollution is concerned. Right now, our focus is actually on the control and less focus is in the prevention. But there should have been a reverse it, that the focus should have been a prevention, means let not the problem come and then think of a solution. But what we are doing, we let the actually problem to come on the surface, then invest the money and the time to find out a solution. Things should have, policy should have been different than that. Let's focus on first prevention, because prevention is better than cure. Rather than drug, what is the right now trend? 99% of the budget in all of this, what we call as a pollution related cases, it is spent actually on the control, and 1% is actually spent on the prevention. Should have been a reverse thing. 99% should have been actually on the prevention. Let the problem does not come. Let the first what we call waste does not come into waste stream. So this is what we called as dichotomy here, that we need to think of that. We need to focus on the prevention rather than the control. So in that context, the source reduction is the first one. Second is if there is no viable option that you cannot actually escape from this, then think of whatever the waste is we are actually getting, it needs to be that you reuse it. Third option is actually you recycle it. Fourth and ultimate option should have been actually that you think of a disposal, as I talked about how much of a municipal solid waste is actually, how much of a plastic is actually generated, how much of a e-waste is. So where it goes, it will go actually to this land where we cannot think of what we call as this. So in that context, this fourth R has also come. That is what we call as the recover. Recovery means that what usually be the case first, whatever the waste is produced, we need to think of a resource recovery. That is the what we call as the fourth. It does not actually rest on the fourth. It actually right now the 5 Rs are actually coming. For example, first is the refuse, second is the reduce, third is the reuse, then a repurpose and the recycle. When you use the word what we call as the repurpose, it means, for example, some material in what we call packaging that as a faculty member, as a student, I have on my table. I can put it actually, it needs some innovative ideas. Then I can make a pen holder. Means what is the wastage for me? I can make a pen holder. So it looks at what we call as a repurpose. What so things can be done in such a way that you go for the repurposing as well. Now let us go actually to one by one, the what we call as all this so far what we understand by the concept and the principle of what we call as the reduce. If we look at this from the what is the reduction policy means, you eliminate or reduce the consumption what we call as, or the term that we called as eliminate unnecessary consumption. When we use the word what we call as unnecessary consumption, it may vary from one person to what can be a necessary for one person can be unnecessary for. For example, I do not need a car but right now, but a person from the Europe needs a car. A person who does not have a amount to actually have a lunch and what we call a dinner, he is not having a necessity of a car. So in that context, it is what we call as we need to understand wherever we can go for, we need to eliminate the unnecessary consumption. The second part can be the refined industrial and the commercial processes to reduce the waste. So we need to actually invest actually on the innovative science and the technology. So while the waste is coming, it should not become a part of a stream. Rather, we need to actually invest in the creativity, science, and technology that we can reduce the waste at that point of a time, what we call as a reduce. Or avoid unnecessary packaging, means it tells upon our lifestyles. To what extent actually I am using a polythene. If I have to go to the medicine, take a medicine, whether I actually asking for what we call as the polythene to get it medicine or not. Can we avoid it? And I think there is a, what we call ways we can ask, give me in the paper rather than in the polythene. That's what we call as avoid unnecessary packaging. I think if we can have a, what we call as same type of a material, for example, we are actually taking all of a milk right now in the polythene, but 15 years, 20, 30, 40 years back, it used to be in what we call as our utensils that we can use this. That's why we need to have a lifestyle changes. It needs a generational shift. Substitute reusables for the disposables. If we cannot do it, we can think of what we call as, do we have a substitutes for reusables for the disposable are concerned. So this focus on actually the where we can reduce the things. The first principle that speaks of that waste generation you can. Now, if you look at this, it is not a duty and what responsibility only for the scientists, nor for what we call as a technologist, nor for the government alone, but it is our own baby. We have to actually take we have to own this as an individual, as a citizen, as a stakeholder. Okay? If I can actually teach my students actually what should be the reduction policy, if I can teach my family, my kids, in what way, what we call as the incremental contribution. But incremental contribution will take place only when we will invest in that. There needs to be a mind shift. If that mind shift takes place, that will lead to us the path that we can opt. We can take the choices that will reduce to what we call as a resources. Buy durable, long-lasting items. I think you and all me are what we call as using so many things. Can we use what we call as the durable ones, or can we use what we call as the long-lasting items, which will have a, what we call as much more life. So for the life cycle product is concerned, all of these will actually help in. So for the first principle is concerned, so for the reduction policy is concerned. And second hierarchy is actually we can go to only use those objects and devices of the substance again refillable. Means, for example, how many of you as a student, they use the what we call as the refillers? Right now, I do not see that trend of it. And 30 years back, we will go for what we call as refilling of a pen. The pen will actually take place, will cost right now what we call as 30 rupees. Okay? You have a 1 rupee or 2 rupees what we call a refilling is concerned. Are we ready to actually go for that type of a mindset and that type of a culture to adopt? We can go for the refilling of the containers. Second, durables instead of what we call the disposables. Third one is the reusable packaging. Or reusable packaging, for example, you have to go for the packing, what we call as a packaging. Are we ready to actually accept that the packaging that is coming, we can use it? So it again needs what we call, whether we are in a position to actually change our mindset. If we are in a position to change our mindset, then we may be in a position to change our what we call a lifestyle, and we may be in a position to change our choices as well. And third one actually that comes, it waste materials in place of a virgin material to create a new product. For example, there are right now the jackets coming in the market. They are made from the plastics. How many of us among us will be willing to take a jacket from what we call as that has been made from the plastics? So this is what we call as, instead of I'm taking up what we call as this pressure on the virgin resources, this is the choice that we need to make. Many recycling variants, for example, recycled paper. You and me are using the papers. How many of us are ready to actually purchase a book that has been made from the recycled paper? How many of us are using the what we call as the notebook that is actually made from the recycled paper? So if these incremental changes are there, I think we can go, and it is a long way. We cannot do the things overnight. This shift is mindset is actually changing. It will lead to make our choices that will be very sustainable. So to be an appropriate strategy, the net environmental impacts must be lower than the impacts of using virgin material, as I was talking about what we call as the, so for the paper is concerned. Fourth that I was talking about is what we call as the recovery, means extracting energy material for this usefully fuels from the waste. For example, if there is a what we call as a burning material, heat is an energy. Heat can be actually used. If there is a what we call as the refuse, a derived material, for example, methane is a byproduct of that. Methane can be used as a fuel. So material recovery actually takes place in the what we call as this. So and then there are certain other what we call a reduced resource options that are available. For example, we have the front-end preventive approach to managing waste. Means target reduced waste volume means sensor-based water taps. For example, if you go to the airport, you will see that once you will move your hands, only then the water will come. So this is a technology that we are in a, previously there used to be a tap in the what we call as that used to run for a whole day. Nobody will bother actually to actually put it off. So in that context, these are the sensor-based technologies. Target reduce waste toxicity, proactive and not reactive, in the sense that you need to actually come forward rather than you will only think that this waste is creating a problem, that waste is creating a problem. We are not in a position to manage those wastes. So you need to be proactive, actually making your choices to coming forward actively in giving your contribution in the waste water reduction or the waste management as well. Source reduction initiatives can target also design, production, marketing of the products. Are we in a position to actually give a value to the marketing of those which will reduce the burden on what we call as the virgin material, manufacturing of products, consumer behavior? This is what I was actually initially talking about. At the end of the day, we are all the consumers. To what extent we are in a position to change our what we call as the consumer behavior, that is very important, and that can in a long way actually give a contribution in waste management. So source reduction objectives, the design, production, and marketing of products. It will minimize the material use. It can minimize the use of toxic substances, and it can increase the product of lifespan, improve the what we call as repairability, reusability, and the remanufacturability. All of this will actually go for, so for the source reductions are concerned, or market the above attributes. It means you have to give us some sort of incentives that those products which are actually made on these lines, they will actually be given a certain incentives on that line. Apart from that, in the manufacturing processes, there needs to be the adoption of a science and technology like improved production efficiencies, in-house reuse of the materials and packaging. Whatever is the waste is actually coming in the plant, let it be used and what we call recycled, or what we call as the use it actually at that point of a time, rather than it will incur the costs of a transportation. In-house recycling of plant scrap, reduction and the elimination of what we call as let the problem, let we do not use the certain chemicals which at the end are toxic, and we need to put a lot of money so for the management of these toxics are concerned. So on the basis of a consumer behavior, altered purchasing patterns to favor longer lasting, reusable, manufacturable, and repairable items. Again, our choice. Avoidance of excessive packaging, avoidance of products with toxic or environmental. For example, there are certain where you will see the eco mark, green mark, means they are environmental friendly. There are, on the other hand, certain if they are actually much more what we call a costly. Are we in a position to make choice that we can afford a 1 rupee a costlier the item that we would actually then consume actually free, and that will only help if we have that type of understanding. Then regarding from the policy point of view, it is the education. You and me are a part of a webinar where we can actually put emphasis on the education through the media, formal seminars and the webinars, and we can have what we call it. We have only the what we call the audit of what we call as this money here. We can have the audit of a waste. That is right of the mandate in certain cases. Voluntary compliance programs, for example, monitoring audit recognition awards. Let certain people be give awarded that they have worked in the waste management. Economic instruments, you can give the tax rebate, subsidy, loan grants for actually working in this direction that they can actually decrease the dependence on the virgin material. And the regulation and the legislation means the product and the dispose something which is a very toxic to the environment, it can be banned. Then we can think of that we need to take the targets and the timelines for those people who are actually in the manufacturing sector, that you need to shift from what we call as what is the harmful, that to be what we call as the pro-environment or the green policies in that context. Apart from that, we have what we call a recycling that conserves material resources and it conserves as well as the energy. Provides economic opportunities. For example, there are so many people who are picking these what we call wastes. You will see in the Srinagar city and rest of the metropolitan cities in India that pickers are there, that they will. It is an opportunity for those people because their livelihoods actually right now depend on those. Reduce impacts on the environment means what are the extraction methods, manufacturing and the disposal methods. We can actually reduce on that, and it will actually increase the life of the landfills. Then it will at the end actually lead to the quality of the protection of the environment. We look at the conserve material and energy. Every ton of a newspaper recycled saves 17 to 19 palm trees. So you can think of what can be your contribution at the and my contribution at the individual level. There is 95% energy savings when aluminum cans are recycled rather than manufactured from the virgin material. 95% energy savings. Look at this chart. Sorry, this one. Energy on the paper, glass, steel, and the aluminum. Savings from the products manufactured using recycled materials. So this is a percentage of a material that we would actually like to have, or what we call as energy savings. Now in the recycling, we have two. One is a closed loop wire. Recycling over and over into the same type of a product, for example, steel. And we can use it, glass bottles. This is a closed loop. Second is a cascade recycling. Recycling into a different product which is lower material quality, means that not of inferior to the original, but still recyclable. For example, fine office paper into the box board. This can be done. Then we have the open loops recycling. Recycling into the another product which is not recyclable or difficult to recyclable. For example, you have the PET soda bottles can be in the carpeting, or in other words, showpiece for the advertisement. These all things can be done. I'll be actually giving a last 10 minutes on, having said the narrative about the context of this, I will actually give my 10 minutes will be on actually, or 8 minutes rather than. Now, what are the challenges, issues, and the solutions in management of this? First is, we need to understand the nature of the problem. Means nature of the problem is that this is a big world. It cannot be, we cannot get rid from the waste management overnight. Perceptions and the expectations. Means what is the perceptions of a policymaker that he want me as a scientist, that I should make a machine that will press the button and we should get the relief from it. I think these things will not happen. That's what we call perception. And our perceptions must be derived from the nature of the problem we should understand, as I talked about. And expectations, that what are the expectations of a government from the scientists? What are my expectations from the students? What are expectations of society on my side as well? We should have neither the over expectation nor over ambitious. Means that this is what we call as a travel we need to cover with incremental progress. Second part, poor science and technology. Means we are doing a certain science and the technology, perhaps we are failing that we are not giving the answers to the solutions or the management strategies to the society that society wants us. So in that context, we need to have a quality science and technology that we will be in a position to offer the solutions to the society, to the world, for that managing the risks. Implementation in the policy law science, and although there are a good number of what we call as the policies, their laws, but their implementation makes us think that the implementation is weak, which needs to be strengthened so that whatever is the role of a policy law, that is actually achieved. Capacity, human resource, scientific and technical. Another issue is that we are right now facing that we need to understand whether we have that might of a capacity building in terms of a human resource. Do we have enough scientists? If I will give an example, how many scientists do we have in the Jammu and Kashmir who are working on these lines? You will see a very few. Means that human resource has to be, technical persons has to be there. If we can actually improve on that lines, the scientific and the technical, this is a challenge and this is an issue as well, that we need to think at how to actually upgrade our human resource, upgrade our science and the technology that can actually offer the solutions. Sometimes lack of funds and the money becomes what we call as cause of a concern and becomes a challenge that we want to actually execute those ideas. Perhaps our budgetary provisions does not allow us to actually take care of this. So there is always a tug of war that we think that it is the management of a waste is the job of the government. That means the government versus citizens. And we need to actually divorce this blame game of we need to understand why is the common ground. So we need as an individual, as a society, as a stakeholder, give our contribution in how best we can manage. Are we in a position to segregate our wastes at our home? That is what we call question. That is a homecoming message that should come from our lecture. Government and the governance slogans, promises, and the institutional capacity. There can be what we call as there's so many slogans. For example, we have right now we are talking about the Swachh Bharat promises and the institutional capacity, but it needs to be that what do we have a slogan or what we are giving the promises, whether we do have the institutional capacity, we need to give the what we call as enhance our institutional capacity. For example, had there been a many centers on especially on the waste management center here, that can give a boost to actually offer what we call a new innovative ideas how best we can manage the waste world. Capacity, human resource, and the scientific technical, as I talked about. There is another issue that we call as a NIMBY syndrome, means what we call it. Everybody among us will not like to have that waste will be generated or it should be collected at my backyard, called it NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard. So we need to understand if it is not my backyard, home it will be. Because the land ownership is again what we call as this issue. In that context, nobody will actually allow that we should actually put the dustbins there. Lack of a sustenance, continuity, and the documentation. Second part is that whatever the research, whatever we are doing it does not have a sustenance. We should have some policy that will have an incremental change. An officer comes, he have one idea. Second officer comes, he leaves that idea, gives his own idea. Neither first idea, nor the second idea is actually taken to the logical end. So there needs to be a perpetuity and a continuity, and it needs to be documented as well. So we need to have a mainstreaming the issue of wastage generation and management, politics and the religion. How many of what we call as this lectures during our the Friday sermons, we will actually listen from our what we call religious scholars that they actually give us some talk on waste management. How many politicians talk of what we call as an agenda? In the Europeans, they have agenda for environment, but here we do not have an agenda from the political. So we need the mainstreaming, setting the narrative, means trendsetters. We need to have actually set the what we call a trend rather than follow which has done A has done this. No, we need to what is our requirement, to what extent we can do, what our capacity, what is our what we call as a manpower, technical superiority. We need to actually set the trend rather than to follow actually the trend. Shift from the control to prevention. I have already given an example. I will not actually paradigm shift from optics to the substances. I think I will focus on that. It is not necessary that we will show that we will do a in webinar and the seminar, then there will be the coverage in the what we call media, electronic media. That is also correct. So for the optics as far as, but it should not be at the cost of substances. Substances that we need to work. That work is what is our contribution, what is our research contribution in the management of a waste, rather than the, what we cheap optics in the context of actually getting what we call as a media attention. We lack in specifics but master in the generalistics. Means we give, for example, if I am asked to give a solution to the waste management, perhaps I may be failing to give the specifics. I will be giving some ambiguous and the vague answers for the management of, be it the waste, be it the plastic waste, be it the what we call as other types of wastes. And then we do have a problem that I think I am alone is correct, rest of all are not correct, and that needs to be actually, that is an issue. We need to actually have a collaboration. We need to have a cooperation to cover a common ground. Then we have the optimism and the passion. Having said that, these are all challenges, these are all issues. But at the end of the day, this is the optimism and the passion that will override all of these things that we can think of. Because we have been giving science has been giving it to, for example, had there not been our penicillium, what would be have been the fate of the medical science right now? So the science has been actually growing. It is giving that optimism, but it needs a passion as well. Stewardship means educate leaders to drive the show. We need to have from the media, from the academia, from the policy, certain leaders who will drive this stewardship concept. Then we need to have a generational shift to incremental rather than emotional and the over-ambitious. Clarity and focus on the target. We need to, what is our target? Then actually focus on that target. Review what are the failures. Review what what weaknesses that can be plugged on that line. So in that context, we'll be in a position. Then changing the dynamics of science and technology means it is actually not a static one. What is the problem today can be what we call solution. What used to be the yesterday waste, that is a resource now. Build our capacity and take a pledge and resolve to fight this challenge. Then coordination and cooperation means between the departments. We have a different types of a departments. I will just quote an example. If you take an example of what we call as a Dal Lake, there are 13 departments that are involved in TK. If they don't have a cooperation and the coordination, and in majority of the cases as it happens, they don't have a coordination and the cooperation. As a result of this, they are not achieving the what is desired target. So a last point, that is next generation thinkers, leaders in the scientists, engineers and technologists, policy in the decision makers, they need to understand this actually. If we are in a position to create those, build those thinkers, I think that may give what we call a solution to this. So I'm actually concluding on my time. The message coming from out of this lecture is, let us realize the nature of the problem, and we all owe a responsibility individually and collectively to safeguard our environment. So with these words, I'm actually concluding my talk on the time that I was given, that is the 1 hour lecture, and I will be happy to if there are questions.
Thank you, Dr. Samula, for this brief, detailed discussion about the environment and elaborating all the R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Now, I would like to request if any of this section, any of the RCs is having any concern or question, they are most welcome to ask the expert.
Samula sir, thank you very much for a very elaborative and very detailed presentation. So I would like you to please give us some tips for office, that how we can manage the wastes in a much better and effective way, because all of my section heads are there in the session. So if you can please give us some little bit tips for management of waste in office also.
I think regarding this, actually, when we talk about what is the waste that is generated actually in the office, it needs, I should have some understanding what is the items that are means what we call waste audit. I have to go for the waste audit. What is the waste coming from? How much of this waste, so for the percentage is concerned, it is coming a recyclable, it is coming a reusable, or what item can be reduced at, for example, if we can go the paperless, means that is a reduction policy. We do not need to actually use the papers on. That is from the source point of view. If we are using what we call a certain resource, or my understanding, for example, so for the lab is concerned, I do have different types of wastes rather than the so far the office is concerned. So if I will have a picture actually on the items that we do have actually in the laboratory or in the office, then I may be in a position to say something able. For example, you are talking about paper, I can think of you can reduce it. Right now, we are talking about paperless right now technology because the e-governance is coming on that. So it is actually putting a burden on what we call as, so for the waste is concerned, we can get it. And it is not that much of so for the paper because it is getting disposable. We have an issue with the plastic material right now. How much of what we call the plastics you are giving? If, for example, if you have a function right now, how much of you and me will be in a position to that I will offer a glass bottle of water to the guests rather than what we call as how much of we will use actually for the tea is concerned, we will use the cups not that's coming from the plastics. So all of these are the incremental changes one would like to actually take from the home, one would like to take actually from what we call as this office. And regarding the purchasing from the office, if you can think of, you have to take the, what we call as certain types of items, for example, whether it can be the clothes, can you use the bags that is coming from the material, that is what we call as this organic material, that is coming from the material like we have what we call as certain thing are the jute bags. All of this is actually, we can think as individually, we can think as a group, we can think as a society as well. Do we have any further questions? This Dr. Shanawasa? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Yes. If there are any questions, most welcome, please.
Dr. Samula, I have my personal question with regard to the last hour of this webinar.
Yes.
Basically, the first hour was reduce, reuse, and recycle. Are there any campaign going on for how we can recycle all these products? Are there any government organization who is responsible, who is in the form of just creating the awareness about the recycle point of view?
Regarding this, so far the recycling is concerned, now there is a lot of actually emphasis by the government on the corporate sector. So for the corporate social responsibility is concerned. So there are the tougher standards. So for the municipal solid waste are concerned, plastic waste are concerned, that the duties like actually the occupier or the operator of a facility who is generating actually this, and it will be the duty of that occupier or operator of a facility that he should take it first, collect, then segregate it, then transport it, and then dispose it. We do not have an organization separately, but there are certain institutions which do have expertise actually in what we call as, I think they are actually giving a consultancy services. I will be in a position to give a good number of what we call as organization who are giving actually services. For example, we do have actually in the Srinagar right now, Action Center, that is a common disposal facility center. So all of this waste is in the Srinagar set and it actually goes to so far the action is concerned. Similarly, the institutions are actually that they should have their own what we call as this disposal sites. But whether that disposal site is a scientific one or that is a question. In majority of the cases, that disposal design, the configuration, it has to be actually approved by the experts and it needs a first environmental impact assessment. That whatever waste is generated, if that waste is not going to actually pollute the groundwater or it's not going to contaminate the groundwater. So in that scenario, it needs that what we call expert opinion on that line.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samula. Now, I would like to request Dr. Mudassir Hassan Bhatt, Assistant Regional Director, to propose a vote of thanks. Then we will conclude the session. Over to you, Dr. Mudassir.
Respected Regional Director, sir, or the resource persons, Dr. Samula Sahab, regional directors from other regional centers who had joined this session, coordinators, our section staff, in charge and staff, Thank you for being with us throughout this. At the outset, I would like to thank our worthy regional director, sir, for arranging such a type of awareness program on this very critical issue. As we all know that regional center has a lot of tasks to perform, and despite being this busy schedule, organizing such events, is truly something that contributes to so as a social responsibility of the institutions. So at the outset, I would like to thank our regional director, sir, for organizing such programs. Next, our resource person, Dr. Samiullah Bhatt. It was truly an enlightening lecture for all of us. You had very well explained the issues of concerned with the environment, the resource management, and waste management, and how these issues can be addressed at our level. You had deliberated upon several aspects of this problem and how problem can be resolved. Truly, we can say in other terms that the resource can be sustainable only if the rate of regeneration exceeds the rate of utilization, providing these concepts in a beautiful manner. Thank you very much, sir. We're thankful to Regional Director Aligarh, Dr. Sabdar Saab, and the Regional Director Shimla, Dr. Joginder Kumar Yadav, sir, for attending this session. We're thankful to our coordinator, our dynamic coordinator of IGNOU Regional Center, Leh, Dr. Rinchen Angbo, ma'am, for attending this session. We're also thankful to our section in charge, section staffs, and all other who had joined this session and gained from our worthy resource person. Thank you very much, sir.
Dr. Shahnawaz, your concluding remarks, please.
Thank you very much, Samiullah sir, for sparing your valuable time and being with us. I am sorry that we had scheduled the session and we could not postpone it. So my deepest condolences with the student who has passed away yesterday. So
I could not be the part of actually this condolence while the vice chancellor and register was at 11:30. That is actually so because of that.
I am really sorry we had scheduled the session. Otherwise, we could have.
I understand that.
I am highly thankful that instead of having you to attend the condolence meeting, you are here. So I am thankful to you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you, dear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Samiullah, Dr. Mudassir, Regional Director, Dr. Shahnawaz, and my colleagues. Thank you very much. Thank you.